Excellent. So, 2 decades ago, local naturalist and environmental writer Brooke Williams had a powerful dream about a dragonfly, a dream that cracked open his world by giving rise to a steady stream of dragonfly encounters in his waking life. In the years since, he's delved deeply into the fascinating biology and natural history of dragonflies and made pilgrimage to see them. He now has 38 species on his viewed list, while also exploring their symbolic meaning and cross-cultural significance. Would you please welcome Brooke Williams, everybody?
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I'm very nervous. This is like the biggest group I've ever talked to, and I haven't been in a church for an awfully long time. So this is our few firsts, and I'm a lot less nervous because of the beautiful music that we just heard. And Heather, the meditation was so beautiful. If I had to say one word about what I work on, it's attention, and I loved that exercise. I think it's so important. Nicholas, thank you for inviting me. I was almost late because I was in your office looking at all the books, and I thought, I don't think I know any leaders of my Mormon faith that have these kinds of books on their shelves. And that's a real compliment. I come from Mormon stock in Salt Lake City. I was actually born in New Mexico, but grew up in Salt Lake City. Brigham Young's my great-great-grandfather, which isn't really that big a deal because he had 26 wives. And a while ago I did a little math, and I figured that if each wife had 4 kids who had 4 kids, I would have 10,000 special cousins. So there's that. Laurel Cotto, thank you for being my friend and container and guide on this trip especially. Heather's introduced me to Cynthia Borgo, who I think some of you are familiar with because she spent a lot of time here. And her work on the imaginal world has really helped me kind of understand what happened to me with that dream and those dragonflies. Hearing you read that description of my book, I thought, that sounds really weird, hearing it like that. And yet, having sort of been thinking about this for 20 years, I've gotten used to it. But to hear it, it's like a little bit strange. So I'm going to try and make it not so strange for the rest of you. The dream. First of all, let me just give a quick background of what happened. I was at a conference on an island in Canada, Cortez Island. Maybe some of you have been there. It was a seminar, and it was pretty heavy, and we stayed up a lot late at night talking and drinking and drumming and had intense conversations during the day. And one morning, during the class, the seminar, we were given a paper to read at lunch, and then we were going to talk about it after lunch. So I went down to the edge of the island and sat against the big boulder and started reading the paper and fell asleep within 5 seconds, I think. I was exhausted. And I had a dream in which a dragonfly appeared. And I woke up. It was one of those deep sleeps where first thing that happens is you wonder where you are. And immediately I figured out where I was, and then I might be late for my next session. So I hurried back up this trail toward the building where we were meeting, and I immediately started seeing dragonflies. On that trail, I got back to the building, and it was situated along a little creek, and there were bunches of cattails growing, and around every bunch of cattails were 10 or 12 small blue dragonflies. And I couldn't believe it, and they were so beautiful and so delicate. And I said to the woman standing next to me as we were waiting to get into the seminar, I can't believe it. Look how beautiful these dragonflies, they're everywhere. And she looked at me like I was crazy, and she said, they've been here all week. Haven't you seen them? And I hadn't. I mean, I had, but I hadn't. Do you know that feeling of I've seen something, but then not noticing it somehow. Or sometimes when I drive, I get from point A to point B, and I can't remember seeing the way I went. Those kinds of things. So there's like different levels of consciousness somehow. But something had happened, and I've spent 2 decades really thinking about 2 different streams of thought. One is how amazing these creatures are, because I started having encounters and paying attention to what happened when I did see them. Before that dream, I feel like I had 2 memories of dragonflies. And I'm a naturalist. I spent a lot of time out looking at things, and I did it in college. And I spent like months of field work in college. And I could only remember 2 dragonflies ever. And since then, there have been hundreds. And I've identified, like you said, like at least 38 different species. There are 450, so I have a long ways to go. In America, 450. So I've been paying attention to dragonflies and learning as much as I could about them. But the other thing I've done is try to make sense of what happened when, after that dream, it was as if my inner dream world had mixed with my outer world of ordinary reality. And a lot of things have helped me with that. Another little quick story that I want to fit into this is that in 2022, after years, my mother died of heart condition in 1994, and the doctor took us all aside. There's 5 of us in my family, and said, this is genetic. You need to all take care of your hearts because there's a chance you're going to have to deal with this too. So I've been paying attention. I've gone to a cardiologist every year, and she's told me the same thing, which was, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And when, not if, but when you get a symptom, get in here real fast. So I've paid attention to that. And then in January of 2022, I started feeling a little weird, like I had a baseball inside my shirt pressing against my chest whenever I would start walking up a hill. And when I got to the top of the hill, it always stopped. So I didn't take it that seriously. But I went to my GP for a physical, and he asked me how I was doing, and I mentioned that, and he said we should get it checked. One thing led to another, and before long, in September, I was having open chest surgery to repair 4 completely blocked coronary arteries. And after that surgery, which took 3 hours longer than it should have, the surgeon was sweating and stressed and came out into the waiting room where my wife had been waiting, very stressed, very sweating too. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Why isn't he dead?" based on what he had seen. And when I heard that story, at first I thought, well, there's some physical reasons. Active people develop these things called collaterals, and so your heart makes its own bypasses, and there was that physical reason, but then there must have been other reasons too. And I couldn't explain it. I actually went to therapy to find out why I'm not dead. And at one point the therapist said, "I think you're not dead because you still have work to do." And I said, okay, that's good to know. And that lasted for a while. And then I started to wonder, what is this work that I have to do? And somehow it came to me that I am supposed to be re-enchanting the world. And so I feel like this is a big step for me being in here, because there are so many of you. And I feel like I'm building this swarm of people who are re-enchanting the world. And I don't think it's going to take all of us, or even half of us, but just the right number of the right people. So you're all anointed as re-enchanters of the world. Does anybody have a problem with that? Good. So one thing that happened was I learned about re-enchantment from, my wife is a teacher, a professor at the Harvard Divinity School, and we lived in this place called the Center for the Study of World Religions. It's like an old motel, so we call it God's Motel. And it's full of, it's got 12 apartments. We lived with people from all over the world, all different religious propensities from Orthodox Jew to witch, and everything in between. And every week in the morning, on Monday morning, I would go down and there would be a poster about the lectures that would be held in the hall down there. And what's really weird and interesting is that up until that point, I felt like any knowledge I had was based on me having a question and then going to find an answer to it. But what happened in that room in God's Motel was that I was constantly getting all these answers to questions I never had. So I had to fill in the questions. And one of the answers I got was about enchantment. And we all kind of have a sense of, if you hear the word enchantment, you have a sense of what that means. And I did, but it turns out it's a historical point where with modernity, our lives, which had been enchanted up to that point, became disenchanted. And he makes the point that that's a myth. Back up. This man, Jason Josephson Storm, had written a book called The Myth of Disenchantment. And to him, the myth was the fact that people go to church, still believe in God, believe in spirits, and so the earth has not ever been disenchanted. Well, I feel it's that, but also a lot more. There's a lot more to it, and the studying I've done suggests that that's true. So I've been pursuing that idea at the same time as my dragonfly obsession. One of the things I've come up with in terms of trying to make sense of what happened in that dream is that my own life became enchanted at that moment. And part of that understanding came from Cynthia Bourgeau, who has talked a lot about the imaginal world. And I've studied this now because it made a lot of sense to me. And it turns out that a Frenchman, Henry Corbin, coined the term mundus imaginalis back in probably in the 20s or 30s. And it was based on his translating 8th century Persian mystics. And up until that point, the humans in civilization believed that there was this realm called the imaginal realm, which existed between ordinary reality, ordinary everyday reality, and the world of the angels, is how Corbin put it. And in between is this place where there's a lot of magic that happens. And the more I've tried to understand it, the more I've become amazed by it. And I came to an article that was written in 2006 called Imaginal Ecology. And since I'm an ecologist, I was really attracted to that. And the idea of imaginal ecology is that the question of what is this nature we're trying to preserve, we're trying to protect. The author of it, Kevin Rickstad, was asking the question because how effective is the environmental movement? And he was having problems with how effective we've been. He's asking, what is this nature we're trying to protect? And this imaginal ecology idea suggests that the earth is not, and the nature on the earth is not an object, is not like a long list of material things that we need to use and protect if we're going to keep using them, but it's a living presence. And you know, people have been talking about that for a long time, but I've started to understand it a little more. And basically, the difference between ordinary reality and the way we've been living and non-ordinary or imaginal reality is one simple thing is the difference between objects and subjects. Objects are things that we manipulate and use to our advantage, and subjects are things with which we interact and from which we learn. And I just love that idea that if we can make that kind of shift, then a lot is going to change in our lives. It has for me. I've really taken this literally, and I've taken it to another step. The idea of imaginal ecology suggests relationships, and it's as simple as that. The people who use the term imaginal ecology are suggesting these relationships. But I've expanded it to imaginal natural history. And a lot of you are probably like bird watchers, or you care a lot about nature, and you gather species like I have and start to learn about them. And natural history, as you know, and I learned as a biologist, includes a lot of things like habitat, physical appearances, relationships, food sources, in the case of dragonflies, flight season. So there's all those things that are considered organisms' natural history. But imaginal natural history is all that, plus like the cultural significance, anecdotal stories, and best of all, most important of all, the symbolic and archetypal meaning of these creatures. So that's what's been phenomenal to me and fantastic, because this dragonfly that I saw in my dream was obviously a symbol. So of what, and what did that mean, and why did all of a sudden I start seeing them in ordinary reality? I'm going to just read a piece out of my book which kind of talks about this, and it's a little bit of an example. So a little background. My wife and I are both writers, and we like to mentor young people. And one summer, a student from Harvard came to stay with us for a week, and we spent the time writing and talking about writing. And then one day we decided to all sit on the beach of the Colorado River and read what we had written. It was the last day of the week we'd spent writing and walking and dreaming, and we were at Peach Beach to share our work with each other. We sat beneath the familiar ancient cottonwood, its roots pulling water from the Colorado River we could hear over our shoulders. Its shade had faded when the gauzy sky captured most of the heat from the distant lemon sun and most of its light. The air felt almost cool against the memory of that year, both the hottest and driest on record, but likely cooler and wetter than the next and the next after that. Alejandra had written beautifully about migration and fairness and privilege. Terry's story about her brother's Dan's recent death by suicide was raw but glimmered with hope. While reading my own story about a recent encounter I'd had with a dragonfly, I felt doubt and confusion rising in my voice, distorting it. The second I finished reading, a damselfly landed on my thigh. Time stopped. We all watched as it cleaned its gem-like eyes with its tiny feet. As it turned to face me, I knew I had told the wrong story. The right story was an age-old story told by many indigenous cultures that a dragonfly appears as a sign that a recently deceased loved one has moved on and is safe. A dragonfly in many cultures is the loved one reincarnated. The dragonfly sat still for a long moment and then rose vertically, disappearing into the sky. Believing in life after death is like believing in anything, the weight of faith against doubt. I grew up with the scenario that the second coming included all the dead sitting upright in their graves, brushing off the dirt, and flying off to inhabit their own unique worlds. I grew up required to trust away any doubt. I didn't, and I couldn't. Did Dan, his soul, in the form of a dragonfly, come sit on my thigh to let us all know that he was fine and that he loved us? My doubt was small next to the weight and the power of the experience, the dragonfly, Terry's story. Suicide carries such great need. With Dan, this need crushed my doubt into fine powder, at least temporarily. I needed what that dragonfly had come to tell us. Has anybody ever heard of Gödel's incompleteness theory? Very few, but I only learned about this theory. I was at a meeting in April, and we went around the room and told who we were and what we were doing. And a woman, an older woman, said she was a retired math teacher, and she had changed a lot since her days as a math teacher. But one thing she carried from that experience was this idea that something can be true that cannot be proven. And we talked about that for a minute, and I just got chills. I thought, that is incredible, because I always had learned that if you can't prove it, it can't be true. And I think a lot of us have grown up in America believing that that's how it is. But this idea, and it started with math, a theory, a theorem cannot be proven, but could still be true. And what that is so freeing to me. It's like freedom. It's like, it means that we can believe, we can choose to believe whatever we want. And I get to choose to believe that dragonfly that landed on my thigh had something to do with my dead brother-in-law. And there's a lot of people that would say that's crazy, there's no way. But if you can't prove that it's true, you also can't prove that it's not true. Does that make sense? And I think that applies a lot to religion. And I think one of the problems with religion is when we don't care if something can't be proven. We insist that it's true. It's not a choice. And it's like this idea of belief and reality, and belief itself must have associated with it doubt. Because if there's no doubt, then what you believe is true. Does that make sense? And I think when we get into trouble and when people start killing each other, it's when they insist that their belief is the truth and nobody else's is. So I love this idea, that I get to believe whatever I want. And I'll tell a little story about one of my last books. I told it yesterday, that I wrote this book, and it was all finished, and my editor said, okay, now's the time we have to decide where this book goes in the bookstore. Is it fact or fiction? And I said, well, I just cannot call my book a novel. I am too intimidated by novelists. I love novels. And these novelists that I have in my mind are like gods to me, and I could never assume to be a novelist. She said, well, that's fine. Let's call it nonfiction. I said, I know, but I made a lot of stuff up. She said, this changed my life. She said, relax. Just because you imagined it doesn't make it fiction. And I loved that then, but I even love it more now, because the idea of the imagining it refers to this imaginal world that I've been talking about. And it's not fiction, it's a real place. So what have I learned from all this? Mainly that the world is enchanted, has always been enchanted, and will always be enchanted, and that the biggest problem is our lives are not enchanted. Our lives are disenchanted. We start to believe only what is right in front of us, what we see every day. Or we go to church and for another part of belief. That's, not discounting this, but it's a major thing where it's a container for us. But I've learned a lot, and for me, some things have happened in this long two-decade journey. And I'll share them with you, and some of them could apply to you, and I think the more of these you can apply to yourself, the more you might consider your own life enchanted. And maybe you already do. I'm sure many of you do. First of all, there are no coincidences, only synchronicities. And what I mean by that is that dragonfly that landed on my thigh, some people would have said that was just a coincidence, that you were reading those stories, a dragonfly, they were everywhere, the one landed on your thigh, it's a total coincidence. And, there's validity to that. But, no, for me it was a synchronicity, which is, according to Carl Jung, a meaningful coincidence. There was something attached to that. That dragonfly was not an object, but a subject. I was supposed to learn something from that dragonfly. The other thing is I can no longer ignore my dreams. How many of you have dreams that you remember? Almost everyone. I think it's like a standard for humans. And I don't remember as many dreams as I would like. And I may have 1 or 2 or 3 a year that I remember, and 1 or 2 that I just have to spend a week thinking about. But not that many. But they're important. They're access. Jung believed that when he was meeting with his patients, if one of them came to him one day and said, I had this dream, and wow, it was a doozy, he had such an amazing place to begin, because that's access to the unconscious. And many times our problems, our psychological problems, are based on something that's not conscious, it's unconscious. So do not ignore my dreams. And then this idea of paying attention, that's such an important thing. Paying attention to what attracts your attention. And I think now it's so interesting how, I don't know about you, but like I stand in the line at the grocery store and everyone is looking at their phone. And why are you looking at the phone? Well, maybe a little sound went off that said, oh, you're supposed to buy this, or, oh, this person needs to talk to you, or you got a like on a post you made on Facebook. And I think these machines are like hijacking our attention. And I love this idea that a philosopher, I'll tell you his name in a second. He said, he studies ancient hunters, and he said, an ancient hunter knows only one thing, that he does not know what will happen next. And I love that idea. I love being out or being anywhere and just like wondering what's going on out there that I need to know about, that's trying to attract my attention from a natural, more active as opposed to a passive way. I love that. And I love the idea of expanding natural history into imaginal natural history. Like I mentioned, that dragonflies have their own natural history. I'll tell you a story. In my book, I've referenced a scientist who wrote the field guides that I use. He's in his mid-80s, and he lives in Seattle. And a few years ago, I went to visit him, and he showed me his basement, which contained, at the time, these cabinets in which 61,000 dead dragonflies were entombed. And he had collected most of these, and they were perfectly, what's the word? Yes, dismounted and in these little sleeves. And I mean, they're still gorgeous. They lose a lot of their color after a while, but 61,000 he had in there. And he helped me with some of my questions. And so when the book was ready to come out, the publisher said we need to get some blurbs. And I started thinking, I said, oh, this scientist would be a great person to blurb my book. He would give it some legitimacy, and plus, when he sees it, he might be able to comment as to whether I've made any mistakes with the natural history that I've put in it. So I sent him the electronic galley at noon on a Thursday, and by 2 o'clock that afternoon, I had a response. And his response was, Brooke, thank you for thinking of me. I've read 30 pages of your book, and there is so much wrong with it that I cannot possibly blurb this book. And then he went on for a paragraph, which I don't remember, but then he ended the letter, the note, by saying, these are, after all, just insects. And I was devastated. And I immediately wrote to my publisher, a note to publisher, and included it, and told him how devastated it was. And he said, what? I thought this is what you were trying to prove, Brooke, that these are not objects, they are subjects. And his whole relationship to them was as objects. So why is this important? I mentioned this point in history when prior to it, the earth was enchanted. After it, the earth was supposedly disenchanted. And one of the main features of that was the commodification of nature. And using everything out there as an object, as a possible profit source, as something for us to use and to benefit from. I like to say that we couldn't cut down entire forests of trees to build temples and prisons and forts if those trees had spirits in them. So we just had to say there are no spirits in trees, there's no such thing. It doesn't mean there weren't, but we just had to say it in order to cut them all down. The commodification of nature, of natural resources. Extrapolating that to where we are right now, carbon is a natural resource. And we've certainly commodified it. We learned what it did. We started going out to find it. We found it. We dug it up. We drilled for it. We put it in machines and we burned it, and the machine spewed amazing pollution out into the atmosphere, which is now responsible for what may be and possibly is the most serious problem our species has ever faced. So my idea is that if climate change is rooted in disenchantment, then wouldn't re-enchantment be part of the solution? And aren't you all glad you're on that team now? Any questions? Okay. Anyway, thank you for having me and for listening, and I so appreciate it.